Well, very good. Thank you for being back and ready to go so promptly. After the reading, we'll be able to continue at the back of the room having drinks and whatever may be left of the hors d'oeuvres. Well, it is my great pleasure to introduce the beguiling Katherine Howell. I think it is an appropriate word choice because beguiling is best applied to the guileless person. I don't expect to meet a more forthright person than Katherine or to be more enchanted by one's poetry. Therefore, it will surprise you to know that Katherine has hot-wired a car, hitchhiked to Las Vegas, dressed as a bridesmaid, worn thigh-high leather boots in a redneck bar, skinny dipped at Big Sur. I neglected to mention Katherine's amazing imagination, her ability to invent occasion and character, which, until you read her completely convincing poems, will seem like traits a poet can't contain. In fact, when it comes to compelling a reader's belief, the acute awareness of a Katherine poem, being subject to the priest's dark glance from the confessional, bearing the burden of the clock through a sleepless night, painting at an easel in a sunny bedroom, or responding to a Rorschach test so startlingly that the psychiatrist asks her to try again, is verisimilitude itself. You do not doubt that you are reading the real thing, lived experience. And yet Katherine can conjure with her poetry. This term we read a poem that directed our attention to an old film, observing closely how that poet reacted to the tragic love story played out in film. Katherine adapted her sensibility to Breakfast at Tiffany's, and with a harrowing depth showed us the pain of witnessing Audrey Hepburn's grace and feeling her own shortcomings, most noticeable in the eyes of the lover with whom the speaker watches the film. The emotional truth is ever what Katherine delivers in her poetry. There is something more, too. Because she is also a fine artist, a painter, Katherine understands imagery in a concrete, not only figurative way. Her words, her phrases, her sentences are applied like paint, always substantial, colorful, purposive, evidence of a stunning imagination and a deft touch. And her thesis, Darkness of Draws, is, as its title portends, unpredictable and full of a rare fortune. Please welcome Katherine Howell.
Thanks for that, Steve. Thanks for that, Steve. First of all, I'd like to thank my friends and family and the Department of English, my thesis committee, Shane Seeley, Glenn Irwin, and Steve for his patient insight and ongoing belief in my work, and my mother who never stopped believing in me. In my first two poems, I find freedom on the road. Hitchhiking to Vegas. It had turned to snow when I decided not to show up at the cathedral. Still dressed in white, I attracted a truck driver who became my new companion. He seemed lost, clocking miles from the weathered webs of Chicago freeways to an unruly straightness, headed for the vastness of Vegas. As we passed Joshua trees, I imagined white tigers trapped behind glass as the casino mirage. I longed for the door to freedom that opened when we pulled into an evening service stop. We were close enough to see the ribbons of lights, laced like lit matches, in an oasis of neon hotel signs that eventually invited us to check in. The grand bedspread was taut over corners of cool sheets where I finally fell asleep. In my inebriated dreams, I gripped a plastic bucket full of change to gamble the future with a one-armed bandit. The night winds of sand matched the movement of my quick hands, reflected in every machine that I played, only for me to leave behind all the mismatched lines of countless lemons. When I woke with a fever, I could hear your last syllables still pouring into my inky coffee that you had left me before our hotel door clicked shut. I'm waiting to return home. The coast of Northern California is where I learn it feels good to deprive myself of what is bad for me when I grow tired of knocking on your oceanfront door that never opens. You watch me behind the chiseled peak hole designed to know the distorted way I once saw rejection. Your mailbox remains half full of my letters, its socketed wind flag up to signal the dreamlike need of a seabird courier. Before I leave to return to the familiar curves of Highway 1, I eye the lone trajectory of rope clothesline hanging like your unbelted pant loop. I imagine it as a tightrope I could successfully walk if I thought for only one moment you could be revived like the small plot of watered plants below, the organic, far-reaching stems of outstretched arms ready to catch me. I'll address how art is somewhat intertwined in my life. Artistic composition by Pollock. Later that summer, I became Jackson's anonymous friend after I saw a film of his life, an artistic composition that quickly changes when he appears on screen, displaying familiar mood swings that fuel his passion for each masterpiece, as I long for his self-portrait of random black drippings to hang above my bed. When I light a beeswax candle that night, the abstract painting transitions from my daydreams into an REM sleep, where his hands become my love-making mentor, guiding my eyes across an advancing body that moves through smoky interlinked strands, showing me the way. A private life. I was walking and waiting with my paper and pen to write a poem, perhaps from beneath the shady canopy of leaves, where I mostly remembered Monet and Garden Pass, then thought of my life in the city. It was there I selected at random an anthology of poems inside a sooty thrift shop, and later pulled the book from my tan leather bag when a yellowed birthday card slid from between its pages. With a glimpse of this reader's private life, I began to value my own by sitting silently in a country beauty, attempting to write, even though images no longer come. The Hollow Inside. During the spring storm, I memorized every body of white lightning that appeared between each stanza I recited to an old poem on modern art. I repeated the rhythm of words that flashed with a staccato lull. As I pulled my tongue back, I hesitated and imagined the magnitude of sound in another language I never learned to speak with you. Instead, I read your eyes and questioned my final palette of day. I remember your pupils were settled into unmatched emerald green-gray hues, blindly changing color against dark masses of trees. Their small offshoots of twigs were lined up like your eyelashes, so thick as if they had been coated with mascara, running beneath sheets of inky erotic rain that beat louder than the heavy weight of my hidden studio clock, set upon a high mantle. The slow tick-tock adjusted my gaze to contemplate the way a wet tarp stretched tightly over our old neighbor's backyard swimming pool where we always trespassed. Our footprints sealed the edges, but we became strangers exploring the hollow inside of it together, only as artists left with an unfinished sculpture waiting to be filled. Read a bit about my experience with Catholicism. Sunday with Father. The Bible passages weren't new to him, but he hunched over their gilded pages like they were as he studied, occasionally glancing at the gray filtered light slanted across his black checkbook, placed closely to his left side, needing the numbers to balance. Then his relationship with us appeared far removed, vast, like walking alone through the desert, where he didn't seem quite thirsty enough for his thoughts and perhaps his prayers to return. He prepared the mahogany table in the dining room anyway, with its heavy extension of loose leaf, ready to be pulled out to create extra room for Sister, who would arrive by Greyhound in the afternoon. Next, he went to the kitchen, filling a crystal glass, save for red wine, the symbol of his Sunday ritual. He casually stood for a while in front of the door leading to the porch, where he always met us. When I made my way to the bottom of the staircase, I suddenly met his eyes. I had chosen the wrong garment to wear. I quickly changed my clothes from a short skirt, feeling like I lost my father that day to the Lord's rules. And my last poem is To Reach for Infinity. At Mass, I see no redemption for those less saintly. My feet are stones striking the marble floor, leaving behind hardened marks that only a custodian of Christ will clean. The pews fill with women who drift in like origami swans. The men stand stiff-backed as cardboard cutouts on a shooting range. They all become diagram props with drawn-on hearts that bleed. I hold 2 copper nickels to toss into the collection basket. I chase gum down my throat with the body and blood of the Lord. Later, the priest possesses a dark glance at my T-shirt from the other side of the confessional window. I worry about death, the way I've come to reside in a single wide, as a wild dog traps me each night, waiting to gnash my crossed bones, reclining in a plastic-covered velveteen chair. It's cold as a tiny department store stockroom, with inventory that includes figurines of a manger scene who have metallic eyes, unable to see a way out, waiting for a new owner. I escape, but the moon's searchlight finds me wearing the stoic face of my mysterious church. My limbs become long enough to reach for infinity, only when I am no longer guided by what I have forgotten. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is John Dalton. I teach fiction writing in the UMSL MFA program. Tonight I get to introduce Jeff Shervin. I've been asked by family and friends and enthusiastic readers if it's exciting to teach in an MFA program and to discover talented new writers. That's an easy question. The answer is an unequivocal yes. It's exciting and satisfying and rewarding to see a writer come into the program who is able in the first semester to create several vivid and engaging moments or passages in a story, and then by the conclusion of the MFA to see that same writer create an entire story or stories or novel chapters in which every passage and every moment is vivid and engaging and crafted at a professional level. Jeff Shervin, who I'm very happy to introduce this evening, has made exactly that kind of progress. And yet for me, there's an even greater intensity of excitement because the novel Jeff has been working on for the past year or more is so satisfyingly original. Original in setting and subject matter and character, original in sensibility. The novel, which you'll soon hear an excerpt from, is set in pre-Reformation Germany. For those of you, like me, who have a sketchy grasp of history, that's around the year 1500. The novel is interested in the widening chasm of ideas that will eventually reform Christian theology. It's interested in artistic evolution, notions of the natural and the unnatural, the plight of the common man, and the privileged allowed to those born into nobility. Its main character is a real-life 16th century Nuremberg councilman and spoiled nobleman named Willibald Pirkheimer. That's right, Willibald Pirkheimer. The other main character is the far better known German artist Albrecht Dürer. All of this may sound ambitious and unusual to you, and it is. But what's got me really excited is the sensibility Jeff Shervin is working in, a sensibility that's both sharply realistic and, at the same time, surreal or noticeably strange. This mixture of the real and the surreal not only creates a very cool approximation of the 16th century, but it also creates a dreamy and austere and richly evocative tone, a tone that's similar to the work of European writers like Haldor Laxness or W.G. Sebald. All of these unlikely choices Jeff has made has resulted in a very distinct and extraordinarily good novel in progress. And yes, it's very exciting to behold. It's a rare and remarkable piece of work. I haven't seen anything like it in my 20 years of teaching writing. Each time I read a new section of Jeff's unlikely novel, I fall under its spell. Please join me in welcoming Jeff Shervin.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I always feel like a fraud after John says things like that. I could maybe just stop now and you guys can still think that I have talent. All right, I was going to introduce, I guess, the story, but it sounds like John did a pretty good job, so I'll just say thank you as well to my parents who are here. My sister is here from Lebanon in the Middle East, and she's 9 months pregnant. My brother is here from Portland with his girlfriend. I even have some former roommates that are here. As far as the setup for the story, like John said, it's about a really spoiled rich man named Pirkheimer. I'll just call him Pirkheimer. I'm going to read you 2 scenes from the story in which he gets married to his wife, whose name is Crescentia. The only other person you have to know is Johannes, who is his father. Although I'll be saying a lot of names, and if you can't keep up, it's not a big deal. All right. The wedding ceremony was held one sunny morning in late autumn. Outside the rat house windows, the trees turned a dull yellow, shedding their leaves in lopsided piles which peasants gathered by the armful and burned. At the altar, the priest read 1 Corinthians. Pirkheimer clasped the collar of his cloak and scowled. He dressed darkly, his outfit a single shade of midnight blue, his mantle and jacket and trousers. The bride was more graceful in a lighter shade, a light cotton blue with streaming sleeves. Johannes had trimmed his beard and tied its dangled ends in a red ribbon. He sat in the first row and gnawed his lip as the priest prayed. When the vows were exchanged and it was official, they were married. He stood and smiled for a moment. As the smile slipped from his face, he hurried out the entryway and headed home. The others passed slowly down the lane through the ladies' gate and into the fields beyond the walls. The crowd had already gathered. Trestle tables were spread with peppered sausage and cabbage and blueberry pie and honey cake. Casks of wine were uncorked, and the crowd was soon drunk, swaying and dancing and laughing. Everything was paid for by Crescentia's father, who was also drunk, complaining to whoever would listen that he'd lost his last daughter. "The last one," he wailed, knocking his tankard of beer onto the table and watching the foam roll over the warped wood. "They're all husbands now, all married, even my last girl, Crescentia. I have an empty house now, a hollow home." Half the city joined the celebration. The butchers arrived with Cass, the innkeeper. The coppersmith came with his 7 sons. The coopers brought casks. Bauer, an illustrator of playing cards, brought a complimentary deck adorned with the Pirkheimer crest. Even little Dutzen, the one-legged whore, came to celebrate. With a sidling step, she crept around the tables with her crutch working awkwardly as she puttered about. Blind Paumann was playing again with his dwarfish drummer. The children were less afraid of him now. He played earlier at Pirkheimer's sister's wedding. 3 greasy-headed boys hunched behind the dwarf, snapped twigs and brambles from the trees, and tossed them at his shoulders. Scraps of wood clung to his back and stood like fingers from his hair. And the dancers, there were hundreds of dancers, scattered between the tables and the Ravenstone, where a new man hung from the gibbet. His corpse swayed on a fresh rope, and the blackbirds circled overhead, swooping occasionally to pick at the sockets of his eyes. In the center of it all, Pirkheimer brushed sweat from his eyes. He hadn't cut his hair since he arrived, and as he danced, it flapped against his temples and spilled into his eyes. Crescentia's sleeves fluttered against her knees. They danced, the 2 of them, with their palms together, shuffling in broad circles. Durer arrived with a copy of his new engraving, The Prodigal Son. "My first true masterpiece," he said. "The first evidence of my skill. I want you to have it." The picture showed the prodigal son in a farmyard, kneeling, surrounded by swine, one of whom bore an uncanny resemblance to a beast they had drawn together. The picture was a catalog of textures: the son's curling hair, the fur that flecked the pig's flanks, the wooden rooftops, the slashes of hay, the grass. "What do you think?" Durer asked. Pirkheimer smiled. Before he could say, he was interrupted by more attendees. Here were the scholars, Keltis and Schadel and Schreier, men from Wittenberg and Ulm, even the Italians from his days at the university. The elector himself, Frederick the Wise, had arrived. Too many men, too much to say and speak, too much gratitude to give. Pirkheimer slipped through the crowd and found his new bride. They clasped their hands together and spun in slow circles across the grass. Durer danced with an old man. He took the end of the man's cane and swung him in a wide loop. When he released him, the old man stumbled to a stone bench and collapsed, laughing and crying to no one in particular. "Yes," he cried. "Yes, oh yes, Lord, yes." Good stuff. I have one more scene. So this is like later that night. When the sun set, the lanterns were lit and hung from the low-hanging branches of the limewood trees. Spots of light in the night, and after an hour of dark drinking, the bridal couple was loaded into a cart and dragged by a group of drunkards through the gates. Serenaded by bawdy lyrics sung out of tune, Pirkheimer helped his new wife from the cart. Into his house they went, and up the stairs, with each wooden step groaning underfoot. The canopy bed swallowed the latter half of the room. 4 wooden bedposts, carved into stags, stared at the newlyweds with round black eyes. Crescenza climbed onto the mattress. She sat on the loose end of her sleeve, and as she shifted her weight and jerked it free, her gaze followed Pirkheimer around the room. He was closing the curtains and undoing the clasp of his mantle, which he tossed on the desk by the door. He stopped and stared at his boots. Their polished tips gleamed in the candlelight. "I think I need more wine," he said. Pirkheimer stood, tugged his mantle over his shoulders, and grabbing the candle, swept out of the room. He continued through the study, down the staircase, and into the courtyard, where he opened the grated cellar door and descended into the cool and musky air. The cold prickled his cheeks. His breath was smoke. Barrels of wine lined the walls. On a wooden shelf stood 6 dark bottles. He tucked one beneath his armpit and climbed the stairs. When he re-entered his bedchamber, it was dark. He left the candle in the cellar. He saw the dark outline of Crescenzia's shoulders, sitting before the vanity, gazing into the mirror, straightening her hair. She had removed her clothing. The moonlight clung to her neck and rolled down her back. A jagged shadow crawled over her ribs. She set the brush on the vanity and faced him, and the shadows changed, diving from her neck to her breasts and the black spot of her navel. Pirkheimer was suddenly alive. The wine bottle dropped but did not break. It clattered on the wooden floor and wobbled impossibly upright. He tripped toward her, unbuckling his belt and stumbling from his trousers. He peeled his jacket loose and tossed it away. It settled onto the washstand, its left sleeve in the basin, and he clambered onto the bed and kicked the bedpost. His big toe blossomed red as the blood gathered beneath the nail. "Slow," she said. He tensed and released, and they lay together. "There's so much time," she said, "years and years we have together." She told him of her mother, who, like his, had died years earlier. Her fingers inched over the blanket and rested on his chest. She slung her arm around his midsection and closed her eyes. Pirkheimer slithered out of her reach and stood by the bedside. "We can't sleep," he said, "not like this. Susanna," he called, "the sheets." Pirkheimer motioned for her to move from the bed. She stood on the other side, covering herself with her hands. He grabbed the corner of the sheet and yanked it free of the mattress. The maid entered timidly, without looking at the newlyweds. He held the sheet by the corner. It hung loose, curling against the floor. The fabric was darkest in the center, where a broad stain curled like a crescent moon. The maid gathered it in her arms, careless of the blood, and paused as if waiting for something more. Pirkheimer bent over the water basin. He lathered his crotch in olive oil, and cupping his hand, rinsed himself. "In the trunk," he said, pointing. The maid retrieved the spare sheet and wedged its corners beneath the mattress. Crescenza crouched in a dark corner of the room beside the window. When it was all finished and the maid was gone, she approached the bedside and prodded the starchy white sheet that gleamed so white, such a moonlit white, so pure it might never be stained, no matter what they did to each other. Thank you.
Now for our last reader. About 4 years ago, I taught a class titled Advanced Fiction Writing. It was an undergraduate class, and it soon became clear to me that something was wrong. It turned out almost the entire class were beginners, had never had a fiction workshop, were meant to take beginning fiction writing, but as often happens at UMSL, requirements are merely suggestions, and the students put themselves wherever they want. The students in this so-called advanced class told me they decided they were all advanced, each one sure he or she was not really a beginner. About 4 out of the 20 were right, and Cameron was one of them. Cameron Burson eventually went on to take more undergraduate writing classes, and maybe in the true UMSL way, he took his beginning fiction class last. I'm really not sure. But when he applied to the MFA program here, John Dalton and I had both taught him and knew he was talented. But talent aside, he had to be able to do it. And doing it means learning craft and technique, observing the world as an adult and in light of what has come before, and mostly working. Cameron was more than up to the task. His thesis is a collection of 10 stories. 10 stories. He is, as was pointed out at his defense, a master of tone. He can create it in just a few deft strokes as well as character. And though his stories have action, good, and needed points of high drama like rapes and stalkings and murders and even a father engaging in a fistfight with his son, they are mainly about people being themselves in odd and lonely circumstances, not knowing exactly how to act. Like the soldier, new to Iraq, who throws a soccer ball across a fence to a local man, thinking it a gesture of friendship. The man screams and runs away, as is wise when someone you don't entirely trust throws something at you in a war zone. In one nicely moving story, a woman uses her ex-husband, who is now her lover, to drive her to her estranged mother's funeral. They end up at that place where love and duty intersect. Even though his thesis contained 10 stories, Cameron came to our thesis meetings with new ideas, constant new ideas. I was even a bit worried. I have also seen an outline of a novel. I know he has a novella in the works, and he even has a book of connected stories already outlined, and they are based on the Canterbury Tales. And this past Monday, I saw a brand new story from Cameron. Please welcome the last reader of the evening, Cameron Burson.
Hold on, let's see if we can raise this a little bit. There we go. It's slow. All right, there we go. So thank you, Mary, very much for that introduction. I'd like to thank my family and friends for showing up. Much obliged. And I will show my thanks to all of you by getting right to it. Chasing light. Sorry, someone left a napkin. We stripped off our uniforms behind the stainless steel stall doors of the airport bathroom. We thrust our clothes, our blouses, trousers, and boots into our already impossibly full duffel bags, the way you push down trash to make room for more trash. Some swore under their breath, others lashed out, but in the end we managed to hoist the straps over each other's shoulders, the USAF logo on each bag blown out like the swollen curve of a balloon. We took one look at ourselves, at our cargo shorts, our sandals, our t-shirts, and scattered like children caught in a lie, never making eye contact, our goodbyes muffled as if they were said at all. Some of these men would, like me, shove the duffel bag into the deepest recesses of an already cluttered closet the moment they got discharged. Others would swear in again, put their uniforms back on, serve another tour, watch another president get elected, mourn the loss of funding that meant budget cuts, reduced sign-on bonuses, hazard pay stipulations, assuming they survived the tour, of course. The designated arrival area at Lambert St. Louis, the go-to international airport for any soldier returning to Scott Air Force Base, seemed smaller than I remembered, but more vivid. Sunlight poured through the windows and littered the floor like shards of bright, broken glass. A woman cruised briskly past me, her luggage trailing, and I almost told her to watch her feet before I realized she probably wouldn't get the joke. I used the lip of my ball cap to block the glare as I made my way to the curb. I tossed my bag into the back of Jimmy Baker's pickup truck the moment he pulled up. Baker was headed south on leave as far as Louisiana and had offered to give me a ride home. I'd spoken to him only a few times before, mostly on the cool desert nights he'd come around with his secondhand guitar, playing half-remembered country ditties I hadn't heard since I was a kid. The guitar lay in the truck's back seat, case open so the sun could shine on it. It, like Baker, had the shabby, distressed look of a thing that hadn't been built to withstand much abuse. I'd known plenty of soldiers just like him, guys who phrased everything they said like a question, who took a second longer to laugh than everyone else, who talked too much to compensate for how little they knew. "You just tell me which highways to take and which exits, okay?" Baker said. "Sure." A few hundred miles passed without incident. We stopped, pissed, bought energy drinks and protein bars to curb the hunger until we found a McDonald's. Along the base of southeast Missouri, an hour or so from the Arkansas border, he turned off the radio and squinted up at the night sky. "So about how far are we from where you live?" Baker asked. "You can drop me off in Memphis. I'll take a bus from there." "Come on, man, that's not what I meant. I can take you wherever you like. You say you live down south? We're going south." "It's just outside Jackson." "Mississippi? Perfect." Baker hesitated before turning the radio back on. "Thing is, I've got a friend down this way. She's why I'm driving home from the base instead of flying. Mind if we make a pit stop? I'm sure she's got an extra couch or something for you." "Better than a cot." Baker chuckled. "Fuck yeah, it is." He finally turned the radio back on and started singing, if you could call it that. It seemed Baker had the odd but uncommon habit of singing songs he didn't know, mumbling through each verse until he got to the chorus, of which he knew 3 or 4 words that he'd belt as loud as he could. We exited onto a long, looping parallel road without lights while Baker drummed along on his steering wheel. He ignored the posted speed limits and tore down the country road, high beams casting backlit shadows, his truck taking up both lanes. Waves of bugs, attracted by his lights, collided with his windshield. He drowned them in washer fluid and flicked the wipers once, twice. "There she is," Baker said as we pulled into a driveway that consisted of little more than dirt and gravel. He parked on the lawn and fiddled with the radio dial, scouring the static for something else to listen to, peering out at the porch where blue lamps sputtered, tiny arcs of flame signaling the departure of more curious suicidal insects. A woman opened the door and ambient light spilled over the lawn, along the contours of Baker's truck, and eventually exposed the cab itself. She waved with her free hand. "Listen, Mary's a good woman, but whatever you do," Baker said, hopping out with both feet like a child, "be respectful, especially in front of the little ones. She's proper that way." He hurried off before I could respond. By the time I made it up the steps, he and the woman had already exchanged hugs and were marveling over the swaddled infant in her arms. Another child leaned against the doorway, a little girl so tired she could barely stand. "We named her after Mike's grandmother," Mary explained. "Well, I named her. Mike requested leave, but you know how that goes." Mary ran her fingertips along her baby's downy blonde hair, frowning, but perked up a second later. "Anyway, who's your friend?" "Charles, ma'am." "Well, Charles, Jimmy, let's go inside. I made dinner, but that was a few hours ago. Plenty of leftovers to heat up all the same." On the way in, I felt a tug on the side of my jeans. The girl, maybe 9 or 10 at most, forehead pressed firmly against the wall, spoke without inflection. "Beware the lasagna." "I'll keep that in mind." Another tug. "Yes?" I asked. "Do you know my dad?" "No, I'm sorry, I don't." "It's fine." She moved away from the wall and watched her mother walk into the kitchen with Jimmy. "I'm going to go to bed now. Don't eat my cereal." "How'll I know which one's yours?" She swiveled her head around, stared up at me using her peripherals. "They're all mine." "Right." In the kitchen, Mary microwaved lasagna and laughed at something Jimmy said. I took a seat at the dining room table and pressed on the preferred lasagna. The next several hours passed quickly. They ate, Mary put the baby to sleep, then she and Jimmy divided a bottle of wine. I wasn't drinking then, even had the chip in my pocket, though it felt conspicuously heavier now than it had in Iraq. Jimmy tossed the empty bottle into the trash. The harsh clatter of its descent punctuated the anticipatory silence. Jimmy swirled what little remained in his glass. "Well, I think we should get settled in for the night." "For the morning, you mean?" Mary quipped, tipping her wine glass towards the window where, on the horizon, the rising sun had only just capped the treetops. The three of us stripped the couch of its cushions and pulled out the bed that lay inside, not bothering to turn on the overhead light in the living room, preferring instead the way the amber morning light made everything seem somehow softer, gentler. The quilt Mary retrieved from the hall closet, a gift from her mother-in-law, Mary said as she draped it over me, depicted a vast landscape and above, birds circling. She ran her hands down my sides, pinning the blanket in place, but stopped to stare at the embroidery. "Something wrong?" I asked. "Nothing, it's nothing." Mary sighed, and I could smell the wine on her breath. She ran her fingertips along the fine hairs of my scalp, little more than stubble. I've always liked how hair feels when it's like this. She rose to her feet and joined Jimmy in the kitchen to help him clean up the last of the dishes. By the time they wished me good night, Jimmy's arm over Mary's shoulder, I could almost believe they were a couple, that Mary's children were Jimmy's also, and that the landscape on the quilt was a prairie, not a desert, and the birds above merely meadowlarks, not vultures. A firm shake woke me up. "Time to go," Baker whispered. Baker already had the engine going by the time I finished putting my shoes on. I made the bed out of habit, but took extra time to neatly fold the quilt and replace it in the closet so Mary wouldn't have to. "You're leaving?" I turned to see the little girl standing on the stairs, fully dressed, probably awake for hours now. She seemed uninterested in my response, or perhaps she simply knew what the answer had to be. "We are." "Good. Don't come back." Once, back on the highway, not yet past noon, Baker rolled down his window and draped his arm out the side. "Mary's husband, Mike, officer, 10 years older than she is. Volunteers whenever there's somewhere to go. Hates being at home, hates those girls. I met her before they got married at a bar outside Scott. Now she lives here. Her family's just a few miles down the road. I swing by whenever I can. She always makes sure I'm gone before a little girl wakes up, though, doesn't want her to suspect anything." "Is the baby yours?" I ask. "Might be, might not be. Mary doesn't think so, says the timeline doesn't match up." "And the older girl?" "Sarah. No, but I wish she was mine. I wish they all were. That's kind of the point." Baker dropped me off later that day on the outskirts of my hometown. He got out to help me with my duffel bag, patted me on the shoulder, and took a long look at the fringes of the small town where I'd been born, the hand pump gas station where we parked, the 2-lane road that bisected the entire town that everyone called Broadway, the irony of which everyone grasped, but no one who lived there actually found funny. "Thanks for the lift," I said. "Don't mention it." Baker paused, sniffed, shut the tailgate to his truck. "Listen, about what I said, about Mary and all that." He thrust his hands into his pockets and shuffled his feet. "They aren't yours, man. She's not your wife, and they aren't your kids," I said. Baker spat on the ground. "Yeah, you're probably right. Hell, I know you're right. It just got fucked up, you know? It should have been me." He lowered his voice, stared at the dark stain his spit left in the dirt. "It should have been me." I didn't respond. Whatever, fuck it. Baker climbed into the driver's seat. When do guys like me ever get what we deserve anyway? He peeled off before I could respond. I remembered something else about Baker then, a story I'd heard from a bunkmate, something about a sister with cancer down south, how he'd enlisted to pay for her medical bills, sent regular checks back home. I wondered if once his sister passed, he'd start sending his checks to Mary and her children, no return address, maybe a love letter tucked inside, maybe not. On my way back to base, just a few days before I was supposed to report, I stopped in to see Mary and her girls. I don't know why exactly, except maybe a part of me wanted to hear her say my name again, to offer me a home-cooked meal, to lay a blanket over me and run her fingers along the seams of my shrouded body, to slide the loose folds beneath until I was completely tucked in, to smell the wine on her breath as she leaned in close and whispered a breathy, sweet dreams, soldier. I pulled up in my father's old Chevy pickup, the only thing he left me when he passed away. The house, it turned out, hadn't been his to give. I knocked on the door, but a man's voice from the side of Mary's house flagged me down. He welcomed me with a wide smile, but his eyes were wary, searching. He seemed relieved when I asked for directions towards the highway. His hands floundered a bit when he talked, and soon he fell back to wiping off the dull black tar greased onto his palms with a bright yellow baby's bib. "Well, good luck, sir. Safe travels," he said, waving the crumpled, blackened bib at me dismissively. As I made my way back, I caught the little girl, Sarah, eyeing my truck from the kitchen window. Her eyes widened in recognition when she saw me. She pinned her face to the glass and took in the sweep of the lawn with one glance before disappearing into the house. I made it to my car before Mary ran out onto the porch, careful not to let the storm door swing back on its hinges and alert the man on the other side. Sarah stood in the doorway behind her, holding the baby. I started to change direction, but the expression on Mary's face, pure, unadulterated dismay, stopped me cold. I strolled around the length of the driveway as if I hadn't seen them, climbed casually into the cab of my truck, and glanced in my rearview mirror. The man, one arm elbow deep inside the belly of a rusted Jeep, tracked my progress. No sign of Mary or the girls now, just a small pink bicycle propped up against the porch steps, an empty porch swing swaying gently in the wind. Mary's house, doused in daylight, seemed less imposing than it had when I'd first seen it, with all that light burning bright within, but less welcoming also. I shifted gears and pulled away. Thank you.
Well, a wonderful reading in a terrific setting. There's a lot to talk about. We can stay till they throw us out, which will be not until 10 o'clock. So please help me thank the readers one more time.